It's terror time. Subscribe now and hit that like button so you don't miss any story. The smell of blood never truly washes off my hands, no matter how hard I scrub with coarse soap and water so hot it nearly scalds. That memory, that sticky essence, is what keeps me awake in the endless nights in this damp cell in St. Albans Hollow. They call me a monster, and perhaps I am. But I didn't start this way. It began with a gown. No, correction. It began with Silas, the tailor of Threadneedle Lane. I remember like it was yesterday, the first time I saw the window display. It was a grey Tuesday in Manchester, a fine rain falling like a dirty curtain. I was rushing past, worried about bills and a job that sucked my soul dry, when something made me stop. A gown. It wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. It seemed woven from captured night sky, a blue so deep it swallowed light, spangled with tiny points that shone like genuine stars. The drape was perfect, impossible, as if shaped not on fabric, but on the very air. And there was a discreet sign, almost hidden. Realize your deepest desire. Ask for Silas. The absurdity of the promise should have made me laugh, move on. But there was a pulsing coming from that window, a low, insistent call echoing in my weary skull. I entered. The interior was narrow, thick with the smell of old wool, something metallic underneath, and a strangely sweet floral perfume that couldn't mask the first. Silas emerged from behind a heavy curtain of deep red velvet, almost black. He was a short man, painfully thin, with long, bony fingers like spiders weaving. His eyes. God, his eyes were like two buttons of ebony, without light, without depth, just watching, absorbing. He wore an immaculate waistcoat, but something dark stained his fingertips. He didn't smile, merely inclined his head, as if he already knew why I was there. "For your wife?" he asked, his voice a rasping whisper, like tissue paper tearing. "Evelyn," I replied, the name coming out unbidden. She deserves more. Far more than this mediocre life I can offer." Shame burned my face, but the need was greater. Silas nodded slowly. "The gown in the window. It can grant the heart's deepest yearning. Beauty, fortune, love." He paused, those black eyes piercing me. "But the fabric, my dear sir, is special, unique, made with threads of pure desire and sacrifice." He said no more. I didn't need him to. There was a truth in that oppressive atmosphere, in that smell of iron and wilting flowers, that silenced all rational questioning. The price was exorbitant, nearly all I'd secretly saved, but I paid. When I handed the pristine parcel to Evelyn, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. Pure joy. Oh, my heart clenched with guilt, but also with a sick anticipation. The effect was immediate. Evelyn wore the gown to an insignificant work function. The next day, she received an unexpected promotion. A month later, her skin, once marked by teenage acne, became flawless, luminous. Men looked at her with overwhelming desire. That's when I noticed the first real changes. Not just in her look, but in her. Her eyes, once warm hazel, darkened, grew deeper, almost black in certain lights. Her laugh, once easy, became sharper, a little forced. And there was a coldness in her, a distance, as if she were always calculating something beyond my grasp. She went back to Threadneedle Lane, alone. She came home with a new gown, a ruby red that seemed to pulse under the light. "I want to be irresistible," she told Silas, she recounted later, with a feverish gleam in her near-black eyes. "I want everyone to desire me, but only I have control." The red gown granted it. She became a magnetic force. But the price was higher. Her hair, once a vibrant chestnut, began to fall out in clumps. The perfect skin developed a cadaverous pallor, translucent in places, revealing bluish veins like sutures. And her mind, her mind was slipping. She whispered obscene things in the dark, things the old Evelyn would have died of shame over. Laughed too loudly, for no reason. Looked at people with cutting disdain. That's when I heard about Beatrice. A young schoolteacher from Bath, pretty and sweet, they said. Missing for weeks. Found in the back of a decaying pub near Threadneedle Lane. Not dead. Technically alive. But unrecognizable. Her hair had been shorn close to the scalp. Her body dressed in filthy rags that resembled scraps of a sky-blue gown. Her fingers were bloody, nails broken, as if she'd tried to claw off her own skin. She babbled incessantly about the master, about the price of wanting, about the blood in the thread. Her eyes were two empty black beads, just like Silas's. Committed to an asylum in York. They say she still coughs up strands of human hair. Here's where I need to speak plainly, directly. Yes, you, listening to this confession in the shadows of your own room. Feel that chill down your spine? That slight tremor of recognition? We all have desires. Dark secrets whispered into our pillows. Revenge. Forbidden love. Power. Immortality. Imagine slipping it on. Imagine feeling that fabric, soft as a sigh and cold as a tombstone, sliding over your skin. Imagine the wish coming true, so sweet, so potent. And then imagine the first strange itch. The first white hair where there shouldn't be. The first violent thought that doesn't feel like your own. Silas is waiting. Threadneedle Lane might be closer than you think. The next hank of hair, the next bucket of dark dye. It could be yours. Comforting, isn't it? Knowing your deepest yearning has a clear price, even if the coin is your soul, piece by piece. Evelyn disintegrated. The red gown consumed her. She became a creature of voracious appetites and non-existent morality. Her beauty was now a grotesque thing, a mask over skin that seemed made of melted wax. She collected lovers like trophies, discarding them when they bled or went mad. I watched, paralyzed by cowardly fear and a guilt eating me alive, until she brought home another gown. This one black as pitch, embroidered with intricate patterns like interlaced bones. I want to see fear, she hissed, her voice now a dry scrape. I want everyone to tremble before me. I want to be their nightmare. It was too much. The smell of blood in the house was constant now, mingled with a sickly perfume emanating from her and the gowns stored like relics in the wardrobe. And I knew, with a blood-freezing certainty, what fueled those abominable creations. Disappearances in the city increased. Women. Always women with unfulfilled dreams, silent pains. The papers spoke of a possible serial killer. I knew who the butcher was. Silas. He supplied the raw materials. The hair of the hanged, the suffocated, those whose lives were cut short in the peak of despair. The blood to dye the fabrics of desire and death. The night Evelyn decided to try the black gown was the night of the end. She stood before the mirror, a spectral figure in the gloom. When the black fabric touched her skin, a shudder went through the room. Not a shiver of cold, but of pure evil. The shadows around her deepened, coalesced. I felt, more than saw, shapes writhing within them. And then she laughed. A sound not human, coming from a wet, dark place beyond the throat. She turned to me, and her eyes were like Silas's, but worse, reflecting an abyss where any trace of the woman I loved was lost forever. You will be the first, she whispered, and the shadow at her right stretched towards me like a tentacle. I don't remember grabbing the dressmaker's shears she'd left on the dresser. I recall only the silver flash, the scream that was more an animal roar than human, and the hot gush covering my face and hands. She fell like a sack of bones, the black gown voraciously soaking up the blood pumping from her neck. The shadow dissolved with a hiss of frustrated rage. I ran through the rainy night, hands red, the smell of death and rotting desire clinging to me. Ran straight into the arms of the police, babbling about Threadneedle Lane, about Silas, about the gowns. They didn't believe me, of course, until they turned over the shop, found the workshop in the back. The remains of human hair, braided like divine thread. The buckets of dye that weren't dye. The long, sharp needles. And the ledgers, meticulous, with names, wishes, and the sources of the materials. Silas vanished, evaporated like smoke. But he left his handiwork. Evelyn is dead. Beatrice is catatonic in her asylum. Other women, whose names I don't even know, are lost in their own monstrous transformations, scattered in cities like Liverpool, Newcastle, Brighton. And I am here, in St. Albans Hollow, condemned for a crime that was merely the epilogue of a curse woven in blood and hair. The nights are the worst. I feel the imaginary fabric of the blue gown sliding over my skin, even in the empty cell. I feel Silas's presence, like a trail of cold on the nape of my neck. He isn't finished. Threadneedle Lane might be quiet now, but human desire is eternal. And someone somewhere is looking into a window lit by a strange glow, drawn to a fabric that seems spun from dreams. And the tailor waits, bony fingers ready to measure, cut, and damn. The smell of blood never truly leaves. And the whisper of desires, that never quiets. Beware what you yearn for. Beware what you wear. He might be stitching your gown right now. Stitch by stitch. Strand by strand. Drop by drop. The rain lashed against the broken windows of the Blackwood house like skeletal fingers trying to claw their way in. The first sign wasn't a sound, but a smell, sweet and rotten, like forgotten funeral flowers left in damp earth. It was the house greeting us. Me, my wife Eleanor, our daughters Charlotte, 12, and Amelia, just 6. We'd bought the place in a frantic rush, a supposed bargain, a decaying mansion on Thistle Lane for less than a cramped flat. Desperation for space after the financial disaster in Liverpool had blinded our caution. Blackwood, as the locals whispered with uneasy respect, was a skeleton of dark timber and peeling plaster, choked by ivy, its gardens a forest of shadows even at noon. Moving in was a nightmare of dust and chills. Boxes teetered in narrow corridors, wind howled down blocked chimneys, and Amelia, my youngest with eyes like dark plums, seemed to feel every icy draft like a breath on her neck. She clung to my legs, her worn teddy bear pressed to her face, her hesitant footsteps echoing like other steps on the worn oak floors. The second sign was the door. I found it at the end of the upper corridor, hidden behind an old bookcase we toppled trying to move it. Solid wood, paint flaking, a heavy, rusted bolt firmly locked from the outside. No key. A wave of deep revulsion radiated from it, a damp cold that clung to the skin. Eleanor thought it nonsense, just a locked room, but Amelia began a low whimper, pointing a trembling finger, saying the sad girl didn't want it opened. Curiosity, however, is slow poison. A week later, the house still chaotic, tension thick as fog, Amelia waking screaming every night from nightmares about glass eyes. I broke the bolt with a crowbar. The sweet rotten smell exploded, mixed with decades of mold and dust. The room was a sinister time capsule. Dark, faded wallpaper with floral patterns like black veins. Heavy furniture shrouded in white sheets, waiting ghosts. And in the center, seated on a wicker chair too tall for a child, sat her. The doll. Porcelain, immaculate, too perfect for this decay. She wore a complete mourning dress, miniature and terrifyingly real, black silk seeming to absorb the weak light from the grimy window. Her face was a disturbing masterpiece: milky porcelain skin, artificially rosy cheeks, huge, deep-set eyes of glassy blue that seemed to follow you around the room. Hair, almost white blonde, pulled into two perfect, rigid buns. She sat upright, tiny hands resting on her lap, clutching a single black satin carnation. Her gaze wasn't empty, it was expectant, fixed on the door, fixed on us. Eleanor gasped softly. Charlotte swore under her breath, calling the thing creepy. Amelia, hidden behind me, froze, her dark eyes wide, locked onto the doll's glass eyes. Her lips moved, forming a silent word. Annalise. We brought the doll downstairs, against my gut feeling. Eleanor insisted, saying it was valuable, might bring life to the dead place, that Amelia seemed fascinated. It was a fundamental error. We placed Annalise, as Amelia began calling her with an intimacy that chilled my blood, on a shelf in the living room, facing the sofa. The first change was subtle. We went out for dinner in York, a relief from the house's oppression. Returning to the usual icy chill, Amelia ran straight to the living room. Her shriek brought us running. The doll was still on the shelf, but her body was slightly tilted left, her face no longer facing the room's center, but directly down the hall leading to the bedrooms. Specifically, towards Amelia's room. She moved, Amelia whispered, her eyes filled with a fear that wasn't childish, but ancient. Eleanor rationalized, vibration, a cat, we had no cat. I must have placed her crooked. But I knew. I'd placed her perfectly straight. The cold from that upper room, the sweet rotten smell now permeating the living room. Something was wrong. The position changes became frequent, bolder. We'd find Annalise facing the kitchen window as if watching the night garden. Sitting on the bottom stair, partially blocking the way. One morning, we found her on the hallway floor near Amelia's door, her porcelain head tilted up, glass blue eyes fixed on the doorknob. Always pristine, always with that black carnation, always in that perfect morning dress. The silence she carried was louder than any scream. Amelia changed first. Her drawings, once full of sun and flowers, turned dark, black scribbles of houses with screaming windows, stick figures with wide eyes and terror-filled mouths. She started sleep-talking, unintelligible, guttural whispers. Until one night, I woke with physical dread. Amelia was sitting up in bed, lit only by weak moonlight. She wasn't looking at me, but at the darkest corner of the room. And when she spoke, it wasn't my daughter's sweet, high voice. It was a low, gravelly, dragging voice, like stones scraped over a tombstone. He got her while she played with the doll, the voice hissed from Amelia's lips, her eyes fixed, glazed. In the conservatory. The floor was cold. He liked it when she cried. Tickled her with the knife first. On the neck. It was sharp. So sharp. Eleanor woke beside me, frozen in horror, a hand clamped over her mouth. Amelia continued, that strange old voice flowing like poison. She called for Mummy. But Mummy was in town, buying ribbons. Red ribbons, like the blood that ran. He laughed. A dry laugh, like snapping twigs. Put the doll in her lap after. Said now they could play forever in the dark. In the cold. The details were vivid, specific, horrible. The pattern of the girl's dress, yellow flowers. The type of knife, a garden trowel with a broken tip. The exact spot in the conservatory where the stones were irreparably stained. Amelia, my 6-year-old, described a murder with witness-like precision. Or victim-like. Eleanor went down next morning, pale as the doll's porcelain, and found Annalise sitting at the kitchen table, on a chair we'd moved, her face turned towards a vase of wilted flowers. And beside Amelia's plate, a small drawing. A girl figure fallen, a large, indistinct shape bent over her, and in the corner, a doll in a black dress, watching with huge, empty eyes. Fear became a permanent resident, more present than any of us. Charlotte, once skeptical, refused to be alone in any room. Eleanor aged 10 years in 10 days, her eyes constantly scanning dark corners, jumping at every sound. And Amelia. Amelia oscillated between childish sweetness and that entity with a gravelly voice and obscene knowledge. Sometimes, she'd just sit and stare at Annalise, and they seemed to converse in a silence echoing with terror. Then Amelia began pointing. At stains on the floor no one else saw. At shadows in high ceiling corners. At the dusty portrait of a previous family we'd left hanging on the stairs. She pointed to the little girl depicted and said, in that terrible voice, "She didn't like it when I took her place. But the dark is warmer now." And here, as you listen to this confession wrapped in the relative safety of your own home, perhaps glancing at the familiar shadow in your bedroom corner, I have to ask, have you ever felt that sudden, unexplained chill? That prickle of awareness that something or someone might be watching you from the depths of a dark cupboard or the space beneath the bed? Children talk to imaginary friends, true, but how can you be absolutely certain it's just imagination? How can you know that the forgotten toy in the attic or the doll inherited from Gran isn't simply waiting? The past leaves stains, my friend, and some stains are like doorways. Some memories don't want to stay dead. They want a body, a voice, a new doll to inhabit. The decline was rapid. Amelia began avoiding sunlight, crying that it burned Annalise's skin. Her appetite vanished, replaced by a strange craving for cold, raw things. Her skin, once warm and pink, grew pale, almost translucent. And the voice, the other girl's voice, became frequent, dominant. It spoke of other house secrets, other pains tucked into the walls. It spoke of the man who'd done it, his smell of tobacco and earth, his predilection for watching children play in the garden before striking. It spoke of his pleasure. The final night was a waking nightmare. A violent storm battered the house, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into oppressive darkness, broken only by lightning that froze scenes of terror in strobe flashes. Amelia vanished from our bed, where we'd literally tied her to us with sheets for fear. Her shrieks guided us, not her child's cries, but laughter, high, shrill laughter in that gravelly voice, coming from the locked room upstairs. The door, which I'd boarded up again, stood open. The boards ripped away with unnatural strength. The room was lit by candles, dozens, dripping in tarnished silver candlesticks found God knows where. In the center, seated on the same tall wicker chair, was Annalise, morning dress impeccable, black carnation perfect. And at her feet, Amelia, my daughter, on her knees, wearing a white nightdress like a shroud. She looked up as we entered, and her eyes were glass blue, cold, deep, reflecting the candle flames like twin pits of hell. There was no Amelia left, only that ancient gaze, that malevolent knowledge. She finally came to play, the gravelly voice hissed from Amelia's throat, but the lips curved in a smile that never belonged to my child. Her place was empty, so cold, so dark. Now it's warm, now it's full. Eleanor fainted. Charlotte screamed, a sound of pure anguish. I lunged, blinded by panic and primal hatred for that porcelain thing. I don't clearly recall what happened next. I remember a shriek that wasn't human, the sound of breaking glass, a powerful stench of rotten flowers mixed with something metallic, and Amelia, my Amelia, collapsing to the floor like a rag doll, eyes closed, body cold. When the lights returned, Annalise was seated on Amelia's empty bed, intact, immaculate. Her porcelain face seemed turned towards the door. Waiting. Amelia survived. Physically. She's in a hospital outside London. Catatonic, mute. She doesn't speak, doesn't recognize anyone. But sometimes, in the quiet night, nurses swear they hear a low, gravelly giggle, and see her lips form silent words. And her eyes, when open, sometimes reflect a glassy blue light, cold and ancient. We fled Blackwood. The house remains, swallowing more shadow each day. And Annalise, the porcelain child, remains too. The new owner, an arrogant businessman from Manchester who mocked our ridiculous superstitions, phoned last week. His voice was a thread of terror. His youngest daughter, 5, found a porcelain doll, dressed in mourning, sitting on her bed. "Looks perfect," he said. "Immaculate." She changed position overnight. And yesterday, his daughter started talking about a conservatory, a garden trowel with a broken tip, and how blood runs so hot against the cold floor. "The sweet, rotten smell," he said, "is everywhere now." And you, listener, are you absolutely certain what hides in your attic or the back of the forgotten guest room cupboard? Are you sure that old toy is just a toy? The past is always hungry, always looking for a new home. And sometimes, all it needs is a pretty doll and an innocent child to watch. Beware what you inherit. Beware what you let in. They're always looking. Always. The smell of ether and old blood never leaves me, not even here in this silent house by Ullswater, where shadows seem thicker than anywhere else. Those acidic metallic scents once filled my laboratory in the basement of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, Manchester. Sense of discovery, I thought. Sense of triumph over existence's greatest mystery. Now I know they were the scents of the abyss I dug myself, with hands trained to save lives, yet driven by an obsession that became my damnation. It all centered on the question that consumed my mentor, old Dr. Alastair, and later consumed me. What is the soul, and where does it go at the moment of death? My name is Edmund Vance. I was hailed as a genius of neurosurgery, a pioneer. I saved hundreds, but no victory over physical death satisfied me. I wanted to capture the essence, the immaterial spark that defines us. I inherited Dr. Alastair's enigmatic sketches, scrawled on yellowed papers found in his York attic after his strange disappearance. They detailed a special camera obscura, not to capture light, but to record transcendent vital energy, the soul, the instant it detached from the body. I spent fortunes, draining my inheritance and the family name's goodwill in Bath and beyond. I worked endless nights in the subterranean lab, a cubicle of white tiles stained with disinfectant and worse, lit only by cold fluorescent lights and the fanatical gleam in my eyes. I built Atropos, a grandiose name for a monster of copper, German precision optical glass, and wires snaking like exposed intestines. It connected directly to my operating table, an obscene extension of the sterile field where I battled physical death while laying a trap for its most ethereal prey. The first photograph was taken during a high-risk craniotomy. The patient, a young man named Oliver, didn't survive. The precise moment of death, monitored by a dozen machines, triggered Atropos. The process was slow, agonizing. Developing the sensitive glass plate in special chemicals took hours of unbearable tension. When I finally held the first plate up to the light, my heart nearly stopped. No angels, no divine light, not even a translucent human shape. There were smudges, dense, irregular shadows, like clouds of thick soot, but with a texture suggesting frozen motion, agitation. They clustered over the ghostly silhouette of Oliver's body on the plate, not emanating from him, but plunging into him, like vultures onto still warm carrion. One of them, more defined, seemed to have mouths. Several, small and distorted, gaping over the chest region. Dismissing it as an artifact, an anomaly, I tried again. And again. Terminal patients, desperate cases whose families, from Liverpool, Newcastle, even distant Cardiff, agreed in the name of science, clinging to vain hope or religious despair. The story repeated. Death, development, shadows. Always the shadows. They varied in shape, density, and number. Some looked like twisted tentacles, others formless masses with dots that might be eyes, still others distorted, humanoid figures but fundamentally wrong, like malformed clay dolls shaped by cruel hands. The pattern, however, was unmistakable. They were always connected to the dying body on the plate, focused on areas of greatest trauma or pain, sucking, feeding. Rationalization gave way to macabre fascination. What were these entities? Dimensional parasites? Literal demons? Manifestations of human suffering itself gaining sentient life? My sanity began cracking like thin ice over a deep lake. I started seeing things in the lab corners, quick movements in my peripheral vision, always when exhausted, immersed in analyzing the plates. The air grew heavy, cold, even with the heating on full. The smell of ether mingled with a new odor, sweet and rotten, like fruit forgotten in the sun. The breaking point came with Mrs. Beatrice, a lady from Bristol with terminal cancer. Her pain was deep, constant. The surgery was palliative, almost a formality. Death came softly, a final sigh. But the developed plate, God, the plate. It was covered in shadows. Not scattered smudges, but a pulsating black web, completely enveloping her ghostly form. The entities were countless, small and frenzied, like black larvae feasting. And at the center, a larger, denser shape, with a depth that seemed to suck the light from the plate itself. Holding it, I swore I felt an intense cold penetrate my bones, and a whisper, not audible, but felt in the mind, a whisper of infinite hunger, of perverse pleasure drawn from another's agony. It was that night, alone in the lab with Mrs. Beatrice's plate under the analysis lamp, that it happened. I was studying the central shape, that deeper darkness, trying to discern an outline, when one of the dots I imagined was an eye. Winked. Not a reflection. A conscious contraction of something inside the plate. Then, like black smoke pouring from a broken vial, a veil of shadow began peeling off the glass surface. Not an optical illusion. It was physical, tangible. A cold, oily mist that rose, hanging in the lab's stagnant air, coalescing into a vague, tentacled form that turned towards me. The air exploded with that sweet, putrid stench, suffocating. Pure, animal fear locked my muscles. I only managed to kill the main light, plunging the room into gloom, before running, slamming the heavy basement door shut behind me, my heart pounding like a desperate drum. That was the beginning of the end. The shadows were no longer confined to the plates. They were escaping. The infection, as I called it, began spreading. Staff complained of intense cold in certain corridors, of being watched, of horrible nightmares with dark figures. 2 nurses, solid, pragmatic people, quit abruptly, speaking of voices whispering horrors in their ears. A recovering patient in the ward above my lab started screaming incoherently about black things crawling on the walls, his terror so visceral it required heavy sedation. And the plates. The remaining plates locked in the steel cabinet began emitting a faint, phosphorescent glow on the darkest nights, and the sound of fine glass cracking became a constant soundtrack to my waking nightmare. This is where I need to speak plainly to you. Yes, you, listening to this account in the apparent safety of your space. Feel the temperature dip just a little right now? Blame it on a draft, your own tiredness. But what if it's more? What if, right now, hearing about these entities that feed on pain and despair, you're attracting them? Fear is an invitation, a strong scent on the spectrum they inhabit. How often have you felt an unexplained weight on your chest, a sudden, profound sadness for no reason? How often have you seen a shadow move from the corner of your eye and rationalized it? The shadow laboratory might have been mine, but the substrate, the raw material they consume, human suffering, is everywhere. It's abundant, and they're always hungry. Perhaps a glass plate isn't needed. Perhaps a broken heart, a devastating loss, a silent trauma is portal enough. Think about that. Feel the air around you. Is it truly empty? I went back to the lab one last time, driven by suicidal desperation and a shred of sanity demanding I destroy Atropos and all the plates. The door was icy to the touch. Inside, the darkness was absolute, more than an absence of light, a living substance, thick, resisting the beam of my powerful torch. The sweet rotten smell was unbearable, mixed with the metallic tang of dried blood and spilled ether. The plates in the cabinet glowed with a sickly black light, pulsing. Shattered glass littered the floor. Some had ruptured from within, and the shadows were no longer veils or mists. They had form, physical presence. Black shapes, dense as tar, moved at the edges of my torchlight, crawling on the tiled walls, clustering on the ceiling like swarms of monstrous insects. I felt invisible eyes piercing me, felt their hunger, a hunger not for flesh, but for the essence of my terror, the agony I was about to endure. Atropos was destroyed, twisted and torn as if by inhuman hands. Something larger, darker, loomed amidst its wreckage, a column of pure darkness sucking the light from my torch. I didn't fight. I had no chance. I felt a penetrating cold envelop my arm, like plunging into icy, viscous water. The pain wasn't physical. It was psychic agony, absolute despair, a feeling of being hollowed out, consumed from within. The torch fell, extinguishing on impact. In total darkness, I heard laughter. Low, multiple, made of torn whispers and dry clicks, echoing from every direction. It was the sound of something perversely satisfied, finally feasting. I don't know how I escaped. Perhaps they were sated for now. Perhaps they left me alive as a message, or a promise of return. I found myself outside the hospital, drenched in cold sweat, trembling uncontrollably, with black marks, like ice burns, encircling my right forearm. St. Bartholomew's was closed, structural and safety issues, they said. The case was hushed up. I was deemed a madman, a scientist broken by personal loss. Now, here by the dark lake, shadows dance longer on the walls as night falls. The marks on my arm throb with a cold that goes to the bone. And I know, with a certainty that poisons me, I am not alone. They came with me. The plates might have been the initial vehicle, but the portal was opened. Pain, fear, despair. They are the true conduits, and they learned the way. They are always hungry, always watching. Next time you feel that unexplained chill down your neck, that sudden weight on your chest, remember the Shadow Laboratory. Remember me. And ask yourself, what's truly sharing the dark space of your room? Is it just your imagination? Or is something, drawn by your weariness, your sadness, your deepest fear, right there, at the edge of the light, waiting to feed? Dr. Edmund Vance sought the soul and found only the soul devourers. And they are never truly satisfied. Never.